created an iOS version of the application, and we're going to be talking about forms. Now, forms are even more challenging on mobile devices due to the limited space that the user has to fill them out. So you want to make them as easy as possible for the user. So I'm going to start off here. We'll just go ahead and put a little label here, personal information. And we're going to be developing just the HTML for the form without the benefit of CSS to style it. So if your form is going to be submitted to some type of back-end server via HTTP, you still need the traditional form tag. The traditional form tag has two mandatory attributes, an action and a method. The method is usually, especially for mobile, going to be post, which is a more secure form of sending information. Get creates a query string at the end of the URL. The action here, for which I'm just going to put a £, is typically going to be a URL in which your actual content will get processed. It'll be passed to that URL in key value pairs. And that backend server can be built in J2EE, Java, PHP, .NET, Python. It really doesn't matter. So now we've got our form, and we're going to be working on the front end of the form, the end that appears to the user within the application. So this is a personal information form. So typically, each form element has a label, and the label should have a for attribute. And I'll show you how that works in a minute. So I'm going to say label for first. This will be the label for the first name. And then inside the label element is the text you actually want to appear next to the label. And then we'll do our standard input type equals text for the actual form element itself. We'll give it an ID of first and a name of first. Now, you may be wondering, why do I need both an ID and a name? And it's actually fairly simple. The ID is used if we want to make any type of adjustments to this element using JavaScript, or even retrieve it using JavaScript. The name is used as the label for the key value pair that's sent to the server in the action element. So let's also do one for last. So this will be label for last. The ID is last. So when you have your for value and your ID value matching in the label and the input, the actual device knows they work together for the purpose of tabbing through elements or getting elements to work with their labels when the user touches the actual label. Oops, and let's change the actual word last here. So this is standard. This hasn't used any new HTML5. But let's say we ask for the user's email address. So label for email. And then again, we have the actual email text that'll appear. Now this time, I'm going to use input type equals email. And ID equals email, name equals email. You may not have seen the input type equals email before, but that is an HTML5 construct, and what this does is it tells most devices to use an email-optimized soft keyboard. So when that keyboard appears on the screen, it'll be optimized for email entry. Now let's ask the user as well for the date. Now this is another, or let's ask them for their date of birth. This is another element, this should be label for DOB. This is another element from HTML5 for which support is increasing. So depending on what versions you're using, you may or may not see a good result here. But on browsers or environments that support it, you would get not just the normal box in which the user could enter information, but they would actually get a little interactive calendar. So ID equals DOB and name equals DOB. All right, let's stop here for now. And let's go ahead and run this in our actual environment. So we'll load the Xcode project into Xcode. That'll take a moment or two to load, and we can then run this in the simulator and see the result. All right, so there's our Xcode environment and our Cordova or PhoneGap project. It's got all of our content in here. I'm going to go ahead and click Run, and that's going to load up, in this case, the iPad simulator, because that's what's selected up here, and we'll get to see a little preview of our actual application. And there is our iPad. You can see about half of it on your screen, and we should be able to see our application here in just a second. And there you can see our application. I'm just realizing, however, that because of the size of this, you're not going to be able to see the on-screen keyboard, even though I can type off screen and fill out our form. So let me go ahead and switch. I'm going to close out the iPad simulator here, and I'm going to switch to an iPhone simulator, and we'll run it there. And our build succeeded. There's our iPhone. We'll bring that up into view. This will be a little easier to see because of the size of it. It actually displays the iPad simulator at full resolution, so it doesn't fully fit on our screen. And interestingly, we actually get a slightly better result on the iPhone. So I'll go ahead and enter my name. Next, moves us down to last. So far, so good. Move down to the next one. And notice, by the way, watch down here in this area of the soft keyboard. As I move down to email, notice now we get the @ sign and the period down here, so we get a keyboard optimized for entering email addresses. I'm not going to enter the whole thing here. Click Done, and then we'll click the down arrow by date of birth, and there we get the date picker. So I can enter whatever date I need to. I don't know, sure, we'll enter that. Click Done, and the date appears right here. So far, so good with our form. Let me go ahead and stop this. We're going to come back to that in just a minute. Let's go back to our source code here in Komodo. So there was the date of birth. Let's try a couple more of the new HTML5 inputs. So this one's kind of silly. We'll just do favorite number. So we'll ask the user for their favorite number. Here's the label. Let's not forget our break up here. And then the actual form control. So I'm going to use input type equals number. Now, with HTML5, in some environments, that's going to display a number picker in which the user can actually click an up and down arrow to click through numbers or type. And again, this can vary from iPhone version to iPad to Android to any of the other environments you're developing for. So you can't guarantee that this is going to be the result, but as time goes on and these devices and browsers in general become more supportive of HTML5 form items, you're going to see a difference. So we do favorite number. So we have a minimum of 0, maximum of 100. And then finally, one of my favorite ones, and this again, we may not see a good result here because of support, but let's do favorite color. And in some environments, you actually now get a color picker in which the user can click a color that they like. So input type for that is color. And let's not forget our ID and the name. Just like that. And let's also add those for the number. ID, FAVNUM, and then the name. Now, by the way, the name and ID don't have to have the same value. I just do that to keep things consistent. All right, so again, back to the Xcode environment, let's build with this new content in mind. It's always slow to build the first time. After that, it builds fairly quickly. And here you can see we don't get anything special except a keyboard optimized here for entering numbers. So my favorite number is 23. Then for color, on this particular device, we just get a text keyboard. But notice how the keyboard varies. On Android, I believe, you're going to get a drop-down for a color picker. So these things are, like I said, changing fairly quickly. All right, so let's stop that from running. So we've looked at entering text. We've looked at numbers and colors. Let's create a drop-down list. So here we'll do our drop-down. Again, I need to put my breaks in. So after that guy and after this guy. So this time we'll do a drop-down list of states. So label for states. And I'm not obviously going to include all the states, but you can kind of see how this would work in the mobile environment. And we'll call it your favorite state, not the state you live in. And now after our label, we're going to do a select box. So select ID equals states, name equals states. And within the select box, we're going to present a list of options. And each option can have a value. That's the value that if it's selected. So we'll do my home state first, Connecticut. Option value equals, for New Jersey, we'll do NJ. Let's add a state out west. Nevada's NV, I believe, is the official abbreviation. Let's just do two more. Option value equals, let's do IL. We'll do a state kind of in the middle. Illinois. And then finally, state where I lived for many years, Texas. All right, so there we've got our select box with these options. So now let's go ahead and take a look at that inside of the device. So we're going to move back to the Xcode environment. Again, we're going to be on the iPhone simulator. I'm going to run. There's our simulator. And we get a fairly standard drop-down, but once it's clicked, the user can pick from this picker metaphor right here. And this is real convenient because the user can roll through pretty quickly if it has a lot of different values. And then whatever you choose, of course, appears in the actual drop-down above. The metaphor is going to be different on Android and on Windows, but this is how it appears in iOS. Functionally, it's going to be exactly the same. Another one of my favorite HTML5 enhancements to forms is the data list. So I'm going to go ahead and here put in a label. And this is a label for, we're going to do a list of teams. And let's say your favorite team. Keep forgetting those breaks. And then we're going to do what looks like a fairly normal input here. So input type equals text, ID equals teams, name equals teams, and then we're going to add a list element called FAV teams. Now this works kind of like a Google search where it anticipates the user's full response based on this list. Now again, not supported everywhere, so we've got to have this supported in our particular device in the particular version or versions that we're running. So I'm going to use then the data list element. I'm going to ID this as fav teams to match the list element. So then within the data list itself, we're going to have, again, multiple options. So we'll do option, value, And we'll just do an abbreviation for each of these. Actually, we'll do the full thing because that's where it takes it for the data list. So we'll do Yankees. And then for each one of the options in the list, we'll do it the exact same way. Option value, get my close quote there, Mets. So just a few more. Option value, Knicks. Let's use some copy and paste here so we can hurry this along. All right, so this will be Nets, Giants, Jets. Now again, if this isn't supported by the environment that you're targeting, really no harm, no foul. What happens is, when it builds, it'll simply ignore that data list, and the user will see a text box where they can enter whatever they want. So here, I'm able to enter Yankees, and evident the data list is not supported in this particular environment. However, on Android, I do believe it is, and it'll probably be supported here in the future. We also have a way of creating a slider mechanism on the actual device. So this will be the last of the input demos that I do here. So let's go ahead and let's ask the user for a rating from 1 to 100. So input type equals range gives us the slider. And ID equals rating. And name equals rating. Just like that. I guess we should give this a label too, huh? So label for rating. All right, so the way this is going to appear is in, again, supported devices, simply as a slider. So let's build. And let's pull up our device here. And should load in just a quick second. There's our title screen, and there's our slider. Now the problem with the slider as is it doesn't give the user a whole lot of feedback that tells the user exactly where they're at on the rating scale. Because it starts, supposedly, we could start with 0, go up to 100, or any other number. So let's improve the slider just a little bit. So first of all, on the slider here, let's set a minimum value of 0 and a maximum value of 100. And I'm going to put next to the slider an output tag. And I'm going to ID it as slider out. Now on the slider, I'm going to want to put an event that says when the slider value changes, we're going to output that value into slider out so the user can see it. So now we've got to do a little bit of JavaScript. Anything that's interactive like this requires JavaScript. So the pattern we're going to use again is here I'm going to do a window onload function. That function is going to be anonymous. And the only thing that function does is it gets ready for the device ready event. So document, add event listener. The event we're looking for is device ready. We'll run a function called onDeviceReady. And of course, that's a name that I'm choosing. We could name that anything we wanted to. All right, so onDeviceReady will attach the listener to the slider. So we'll get the slider, which is ID'd as rating. So document get element by ID rating dot add event listener, and the event we're going to be listening for is change. Now sometimes right here where my cursor is flashing, you will not see a reference to another function name, but another anonymous function. So let's go ahead and do it that way. I like to do it like this so you don't get confused. I put the false first, and then I'll put the anonymous function right in here. This, to people who aren't familiar with JavaScript a great deal, is a more confusing way to do it. But again, this function only gets called in the context of the change event, so I would say it's appropriate. Now, when the change event occurs on the rating slider, right, the user chooses a different value, we want to get this slider out, and we want to populate that with the current position of the slider value. So document get element by ID, slider out, and let's set its inner HTML equal to, and then we have to get the value of the slider itself. So what we're going to do here is, again, we're going to get document get element by ID rating dot value. Let me take a moment to go over that. That code's a little bit confusing. So on device ready, right, when the device is ready, we're going to go ahead and get the rating element, right? The rating element is that slider I just showed you. So here's the rating element. And when we've gotten that rating element, we're going to add an event listener listening for the change event. When that change event occurs, we're going to run this anonymous function, which is going to get the slider out element, which is this output. And actually, let me change this really, because it's not an empty element. It's going to have the value in it. That's probably going to work better. And what we're going to put inside that element in the inner HTML is going to be the rating from the slider, the rating from the slider itself. So whatever position we're at in the slider is going to appear right there. All right. So we've got that code written. Now, hoping we don't have any errors, let's go into Xcode, and we'll stop the previous run of the application. We'll click Run again, and it's already built, so I'll bring up my simulator, and we should see this appear in just a second. I'm going to move the slider, and there you can see what we just coded. So now the user has some feedback with the slider. And I will say that these outputs are fairly useful with different types of form fields to give the user some feedback on whether or not the information they've typed is correct or in the correct format. For example, we could test the email and see, did they type an email in a true format? And if not, have an output element right here which says, your email's in the wrong